The palace of Aurora stood tall in the light of the morning sun. Its towers reached high, and its walls shone like silver. Inside the grand hall, Princess Clara walked with heavy steps. She had heard her mother, Queen Eleanor, call for her. Clara knew what this meeting was about, and her heart was full of unrest. When Clara entered, the queen sat upon her throne, calm and strong. Around her, the court waited in silence. The queen spoke with a voice that filled the hall. She told Clara that the time had come for her to wed. The future of the kingdom depended on it. She would be joined with Ethan Grey, a nobleman who had gained much honor in the realm. Clara lifted her chin. She felt fire in her chest. She cried that she would not marry him. She said she wished to choose her own life, her own path. Her words echoed across the hall. Some of the court gasped, for no princess had spoken like that to her queen before. The queen did not raise her voice. She told Clara that duty was greater than desire. She spoke of the wars and dangers that had troubled the kingdom. She said that the bond with Ethan would bring peace and strength. Clara shook her head. She said again that she would not wed him. Her voice trembled, but her spirit did not. Clara turned and left the hall. Her feet carried her past guards and servants out into the garden. She sat by the fountain, her hands tight in her lap. She thought of her life, trapped in rules and orders. She wanted to see the wide world, not to be locked in a bond she did not choose. Her mind went back to her childhood. She had run through the palace with laughter, free as the wind. Now she felt chains around her. She told herself she would not bow to fate. She would not give up her freedom so easily. In another part of the palace, the queen sat in deep thought. She cared for her daughter, yet she also bore the weight of the crown. She thought of the threats beyond their walls. The kingdom needed strong ties, and Ethan Grey was a man of trust. The queen whispered that Clara would learn in time, but the choice could not be delayed. As the day moved on, Clara walked the halls again. She passed portraits of her ancestors, all bound by duty. She felt their eyes upon her, heavy and stern. She wondered if they too had wished for freedom, but were bound by the same chains. She clenched her fists and swore that she would not let her life be stolen. That evening, the sun fell behind the hills. Clara stood on the balcony, looking out over the city. The lights of the people's homes shone in the dusk. She knew the queen was right, that the kingdom needed strength, but her heart fought against it. She asked herself if there was another way, a path where she could be true to herself and still serve her people. Her thoughts were broken by the sound of footsteps. A servant bowed and told her that Ethan Grey would soon arrive at the palace. Clara's breath caught in her chest. The name she had refused now became real. She would soon meet the man her mother had chosen for her. She did not know if she would despise him or see something new in him. All she knew was that her life was about to change. The night grew dark, and the palace lamps burned bright. Clara stood alone, her heart torn between duty and freedom. She whispered to the night sky that she would not bow, not yet. But the winds carried her words away, as if the world itself was waiting to test her strength. The morning sun rose over the palace of Aurora, and the sound of horses echoed in the courtyard. Princess Clara stood at her window, her heart uneasy. She had been told that Ethan Grey, the man chosen by her mother, had arrived. She had no wish to meet him, but she knew she could not avoid it. The great hall was filled with nobles and guards as Ethan entered. He did not walk with pride or boast, but with calm steps. He bowed before Queen Eleanor, his voice steady and respectful. His face was strong, but his eyes carried kindness. The queen welcomed him as a guest and as the one who might share a future with Clara. Clara stood by her mother's side, her back straight and her lips pressed tight. She looked at Ethan with cold eyes. She thought he would be arrogant, like many nobles she had seen before. But his manner was different. He did not brag about his wealth or his bloodline. He spoke only of service to the kingdom and of loyalty to its people. The queen asked Clara to greet him. Clara lowered her head slightly, but spoke no word of warmth. Ethan did not seem troubled. He gave her a gentle smile as if he understood her silence. Clara turned away, her heart heavy with defiance. Later that day, Clara walked in the gardens, hoping for peace. She was surprised to find Ethan there. He was not with guards or nobles, but alone, standing by the roses. He greeted her kindly. Clara wished to turn away, yet something in his voice held her still. They spoke, though Clara kept her answers short. Ethan told her of his life, how he had once lived far from the palace, how he had fought to defend villages at the borders from raiders. He spoke with no pride, only truth. Clara listened in silence, trying not to care, yet she felt a strange pull in her chest. Ethan asked Clara what she wished for most. She looked at him with sharp eyes and said she wanted freedom, not chains. Ethan did not laugh or scold her. He nodded and said that freedom was precious, but duty could protect it. His words stayed with her even after she left the garden. That evening, the queen called Clara to her chamber. She asked what Clara thought of Ethan. Clara said he was not as she expected, but she still did not wish to wed him. The queen reminded her that this bond was not only for her, but for the kingdom. Clara grew angry and said she wanted no man to decide her fate. The queen sighed and told her that the world beyond their walls was full of threats. Without strong bonds, the people would suffer. Clara left the chamber with her heart torn. In the days that followed, Clara saw more of Ethan. He spoke with the soldiers, learning their needs. He walked among the servants, speaking to them with respect. He even helped a young stable boy lift heavy sacks of grain. Clara watched from afar, wondering why a nobleman would lower himself to such tasks. One afternoon, Clara found herself beside him again. She asked why he acted so humbly. Ethan said that true strength was not in rank or wealth, but in service. He said a leader must walk among the people to understand them. Clara said nothing, but her heart felt less cold. Still, she told herself she would not surrender. She whispered in her chamber that she would never wed him, no matter what kindness he showed. Yet each day, his actions weighed upon her thoughts. He was not the man she had feared. He was something else, something harder to hate. As the sun set on the 7th day of his stay, Clara stood on her balcony once more. She saw Ethan in the courtyard speaking with the guards. His voice was calm, and the men listened with respect. Clara's chest tightened, and she turned away. She told herself again that she would not bow. But deep inside, she knew her heart was beginning to change, though she did not wish to admit it. The peace of the palace did not last long. One morning, a rider rushed through the gates with dust on his cloak and fear in his eyes. He brought news that an enemy army was moving toward the borders of Aurora. The court filled with whispers, and Queen Eleanor stood tall, to hear every word. The danger was real and near. Princess Clara listened from the side. Her heart grew heavy. She had spoken so often of freedom, yet she now saw the weight her mother carried. The queen turned to her council, seeking plans to defend the land. Ethan Grey stepped forward. His voice was calm but strong. He told the queen he had faced these raiders before and knew their ways. He asked for men to prepare the defenses. Some nobles scoffed. They said Ethan was young and untested for such a task. But the guards who had served at the border spoke with respect. They said Ethan had once stood with them in battle, fighting until the last foe fled. The queen looked at him with trust, then granted him command of the defense. Clara's eyes followed him. She had told herself she wanted no part in his world, yet she felt a strange pull as he walked away to gather soldiers. She wondered why her chest tightened when she saw him carry such burden. That evening, Clara walked through the armory. She saw soldiers sharpening blades, fitting armor, and speaking in low voices. Ethan moved among them, not as a noble above, but as one of them. He carried a sword in his hand and spoke words of courage. Clara hid behind a column, listening. She saw how the men looked at him with trust. She felt something stir inside her. The next day, word spread that the enemy had drawn closer. The queen ordered the gates to be closed. People gathered in the city streets, fearful of what would come. Clara moved among them with her maid, hearing their worries. She heard mothers speak of sons at the border and fathers' fear for their homes. For the first time, she understood what her mother meant when she said duty was greater than desire. At night, Clara could not sleep. She stood at her window, watching the lights of the campfires beyond the hills. She thought of Ethan standing there, ready to face the storm. She whispered to herself that perhaps he was not the chain she thought, but a shield against the darkness. The attack came at dawn. The sound of horns broke the morning air. Clara rushed to the walls with her mother. From the towers, she saw dust rise from the fields as the enemy charged. The soldiers of Aurora held their line. Ethan stood at the front, his sword raised, his voice calling the men to stand firm. The clash was fierce. Arrows darkened the sky. The roar of steel and cries of men filled the air. Clara gripped the stone wall, fear in her heart. She saw Ethan strike with skill, holding the line, even as the enemy pressed hard. He moved with courage, never stepping back, lifting the spirits of all who fought beside him. Hours passed. Smoke rose, and the earth shook with the weight of battle. Clara watched every moment, her eyes fixed on him. When an enemy rider broke through toward the gates, Ethan turned and faced him alone. The clash was fast, and Ethan brought him down. Clara gasped, her chest filled with both fear and pride. By sunset, the enemy began to retreat. The soldiers of Aurora held strong. The people on the walls cheered as the last foes fled into the hills. Ethan lowered his sword, his face weary but firm. Clara felt tears in her eyes, though she did not know why. She had once sworn she would never wed him, yet now her heart spoke a different truth. That night, the city lit torches to honor the soldiers. The queen praised Ethan for his courage and wisdom. Clara stood beside her mother, silent but full of thought. She knew her world had changed. Ethan was no longer just the man chosen for her. He was the man who had stood when others faltered, the man who had saved her people. Her heart no longer resisted him as before. Something new had begun to grow, though she dared not yet speak it. The city of Aurora was quiet after the battle. The streets carried the smell of smoke, and the people spoke in low voices. Princess Clara walked among them, her cloak pulled close. She saw broken carts, damaged homes, and soldiers carrying the wounded. Her heart ached for them. For the first time, she understood what it meant to carry the weight of a crown. Ethan Gray was everywhere. He moved with strength, though his face showed his weariness. He helped lift beams from fallen houses, carried water to the injured, and gave orders to the guards with steady command. Clara followed him with her eyes. She had once thought of him only as a chain, yet now she saw him as a pillar holding the kingdom upright. That night, Clara went to her mother's chamber. Queen Eleanor sat at her table, her hands folded, her face pale from worry. Clara asked why she had trusted Ethan with the defense. The queen answered that she had seen his worth long before Clara had. She told her daughter that a true leader was not born from titles, but from actions. Clara lowered her eyes, for in her heart she knew it was true. Days passed. The people began to rebuild. Ethan walked through the city without guards, speaking with the folk, asking what they needed most. Clara joined him once, though she kept her distance. She heard the way the people thanked him, how they looked at him with hope. The weight in her chest grew heavier each time she saw their trust in him. One morning, Clara found Ethan in the training yard. He was sparring with soldiers, his sword flashing in the sun. Sweat rolled down his face, yet his strikes never slowed. Clara stepped closer, unable to stop herself. When he noticed her, he lowered his blade and bowed. Clara asked him why he risked his life so freely. Ethan answered that his life was not his alone. He said a man must stand for those who cannot. Clara felt her throat tighten at his words. Later that day, as Clara walked the palace halls, she heard voices raised in anger. Some nobles were speaking against Ethan. They said he had gained too much power, that he was not of royal blood, and should not be trusted so deeply. Clara listened from the shadows, her fists clenched. She wanted to step forward and defend him, but she held her tongue. Still, the words burned inside her. That evening, Ethan was called to the council chamber. The queen asked him to speak of the future defense. Ethan laid out a plan with calm detail, showing maps and paths, speaking with knowledge no other noble had. Even the harsh voices in the room grew silent as he spoke. Clara sat beside her mother, watching. Pride shifted into something softer, though she still fought to keep it hidden. When the council ended, Clara followed Ethan into the garden. The night air was cool, and the stars were bright above them. Clara asked if he knew the nobles spoke against him. Ethan smiled faintly and said he had heard, but it did not matter. He said his service was to the queen and the people, not to their pride. Clara's chest stirred with something she could no longer deny. She saw that he was not bound by ambition, but by honor. The next day, another threat came. A band of raiders tried to strike a nearby village. Clara insisted on going with the guards to see the truth for herself. The queen did not wish it, but Clara's will was strong. Ethan rode with them. When they reached the village, the raiders had already set fire to the fields. Ethan led the charge, and Clara watched him fight with unshaken strength. She saw him shield a fallen guard, lift him onto a horse, and turn back to face the enemy without fear. When the battle was done, Clara walked among the wounded. She saw Ethan kneeling to bind a soldier's wound with his own cloak. Her eyes filled with tears she could not stop. She thought of her words from days past, when she swore she would never wed him. Now those words seemed hollow. The man before her was not a chain, but the key to strength and hope. That night, Clara sat alone in her chamber. She stared at her hands, trembling with the truth she could no longer escape. She whispered to herself that her heart had changed. She had once cried that she would never wed him, yet now she feared what her life would be without him. The dawn would bring new trials, but her heart was no longer her own. It had already chosen, though she had not spoken it aloud. The days after the battle brought a calm that felt fragile. The kingdom of Aurora began to heal, but the memory of danger still weighed heavy on the people. Princess Clara walked through the palace with her mind torn between duty and desire. She had once stood firm against the bond her mother had chosen for her, but now her heart spoke with a voice she could not silence. Ethan Gray spent his days with the soldiers and the townsfolk. He oversaw the rebuilding of walls, made sure food reached every home, and worked until nightfall. His clothes were simple, his hands often dirty from labor, yet his spirit never wavered. Clara watched him more each day, and she felt the chain of pride around her heart begin to break. One evening, Queen Eleanor called Clara to her chamber. "Ah!" The queen's voice was calm but strong as she spoke. She told her daughter that the time for choice had come. The bond with Ethan had been meant as duty, but now it was clear that it had grown into something more. She asked Clara to speak her true heart. Clara bowed her head. For so long she had said she would not wed him. But when she thought of his face, his voice, his strength, she knew her words no longer held truth. That night, Clara stood on the balcony, the city lights burning below. He thought of her first cry of refusal, the fire in her voice, the pride in her chest. She had wanted freedom above all else. Now she saw that freedom was not lost in love. It was found in trust, in standing beside someone who gave strength instead of chains. She whispered to the night sky that she had been wrong. The next morning, the court gathered in the great hall. The queen sat upon her throne. Ethan stood among the guards, and Clara walked forward with steady steps. The nobles waited, their faces curious. Clara lifted her voice so all could hear. She said she had once refused the bond, but she had seen Ethan's heart and his honor. She said her choice was now her own, and she chose him not for duty, but for love. The hall fell silent, and then a murmur rose like a wave. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes wide with surprise. He bowed before the queen, then looked at Clara. His voice was low, but full of feeling. He said he had never sought power or title, only to serve. But if the princess chose him, he would stand by her all his days. Clara felt warmth flood her heart, stronger than any pride she had known. The queen smiled for the first time in many days. She lifted her hand and blessed their union, not as a bond of politics, but as a bond of trust and hope. The court bowed, the nobles bent their heads, and the people outside the hall cheered when the news spread through the city. Clara stood beside Ethan as the sound of joy filled the air. She thought of the path that had led her here. From her refusal, to the battles fought, to the nights she wept alone, all had shaped her into this moment. She had not lost herself. She had found a new strength, one that grew not from standing alone, but from standing with someone who shared her burden. That evening, the city lit torches in the streets. Music filled the air, and laughter rang from every home. Clara and Ethan walked among the people together. Children ran beside them, and old men lifted their hats. The folks spoke of hope, of safety, of brighter days to come. Clara felt the weight of her crown lighter than ever before. As the stars filled the sky, Clara and Ethan stood on the palace steps. The people below cheered, raising their voices for their princess and her chosen companion. Clara turned to Ethan, her eyes shining. She said that once she had sworn never to wed him, but now she could not imagine a life without him. Ethan smiled, and for the first time, Clara felt free in both heart and spirit. The night ended with peace over the land. The princess who once cried that she would never wed a human now stood beside the man she had chosen with her own will. The kingdom of Aurora stood united, stronger than before, with hope bright as the dawn.